All right. So the neoclassical in France interrupted by the French Revolution, and then when Napoleon came to power, he introduced his own style called Empire style, which is really his own version of neoclassical that is predominantly Roman and Egyptian, which is a little most of the time you see Roman and Greek paired up, but with Napoleon it is more Roman and Egyptian. Um, I mentioned briefly this style called Biedermeier, and I only have little fragments of it in the presentation, but um, I want to bring this up here. I'm going to share the screen. All right, can you see that?
Yes.
Great. So this is, I put a link to this in the 19th century section in the presentations. So this is a pretty decent, it's a kind of straightforward brief article about what Biedermeier style is. The reason to bring it up is that you'll still encounter it. Um, it is, there was no person called Biedermeier except for a fictional character that appeared in, I think he was like newspaper. He was kind of like this, like a character that was meant to represent um, the sort of like middle to upper class, as they say, typically bourgeois German, and it originated in southern Germany, Austria, and it was after the Napoleonic Wars were over. Napoleon had invaded from France. He went east and got all the way into Russia with his armies before they made the terrible mistake of trying to invade Russia during the winter. Bad idea. Even if you show up in the summer, if the war kind of bogs down and it gets to be winter, they should retreat and get the hell out of Russia in the winter because it was very harsh. So the one thing that Napoleon did as he went and conquered the areas east of France, one of them being the German-speaking countries, he brought this style, and local craftspeople picked this up and designed this furniture that owes a lot to the Empire style. This sofa, for example, has this like similar to like this like Roman lectus bracket, but it's a lot simpler. It's made of local woods from that region. There's a lot less gold. There's barely any gold on it, if at all, and it's sometimes mischaracterized as being this middle class furniture. The stuff was still pretty pricey, but the Biedermeier, it is kind of like a Empire Light in a way. It has elements of like Louis XVI neoclassicism, but the Biedermeier, like this Biedermeier chair, there is one like this that's in the Art Institute of Chicago, and it is this. So this is kind of characteristic, where it's simpler, kind of flat shape, but it's really beautifully done. And then this kind of like striped upholstery on the seat. This has got some similarities to some of the French neoclassical. So really nice stuff. You can see this like really high gloss lacquer that's on the surface, and like this like use of, you can see here like the knot in the wood. They just like used a lot of like the natural appearance of wood, like the like burley maple. Just it's really one of the first times you see grain, like wood grain, used to sort of like preserve for its beauty, which is normally you'd have to either gild it, use marquetry to cover it up to create a design. The ormolu, that metallic gold-looking brass, where they like take these like mounts. That's all over like the Baroque and Rococo stuff and Empire. That's all gone. They really, this is really this emphasis in design and materials, also just like the beauty of finishes. So, and it's, in its own way, it's very much, it's almost like it's really like this precursor to more like contemporary, like, 20th century design that strips away a lot of ornament. You can always find these earlier styles that kind of point the way. There's another one. I know I've got someone in one of these presentations. I think it's the Victorian one. I've got an image of a tonneau chair, which is also the designer Tonnet was originally from, I believe, Austria and worked in Paris. But he pioneered bent wood furniture, where you would cut wood into like thinner strips so that they could bend them, and then they would like attach, like sort of glue them together and bend them by steaming and heating them. And they created this like some really beautiful furniture that we still use that kind of furniture today. All right, so Biedermeier came with like furniture, interior furnishings, wall coverings, carpets. It was really more like this, one of the first, almost like this, like one of the first interior design styles. Okay. So that is Biedermeier. I also want to talk a little bit about the Industrial Revolution, because the Industrial Revolution, it happens in the 18th century, where instead of things being made by hand, things more and more come to be made using machines. Now we have robotic, just automated production where people aren't, in some cases, human hands aren't even doing it. They program the machines, they monitor the machines to make sure they're working properly, but certain repetitive tasks now can be carried out completely by robots. We still need the human eye to inspect things, but this all kind of got started in the 18th century. So around like in the the neoclassical period, middle of the 18th century, you start to see some like the beginnings of mechanization and industrialization. And one of the reasons I want to talk about this is that in the 19th century, I meant the arts and crafts movement is one specific movement that is it's really like it occurs in opposition to industrialization. So this article that is from the history website, history.com website, this 2 paragraphs right here. Though many people in Britain and a lot in Great Britain, that's really where it got going first and fastest. And there was a rapid industrialization in England in the late 18th, early 19th century. And that's the time we're in right now in this class. So though many people in Britain had begun moving to the cities from rural areas before the Industrial Revolution, this process accelerated dramatically with industrialization as the rise of large factories turned smaller towns into major cities over the span of decades. This rapid urbanization brought significant challenges as overcrowded cities suffered from pollution, inadequate sanitation, and lack of clean drinking water. So the industrialization happened fast without much of a plan for how people were going to actually live in it. Meanwhile, even as industrialization increased economic output overall and improved the standard of living for the middle and upper classes, poor and working class people continued to struggle. The mechanization of labor created by technological innovation had made working in factories increasingly tedious and sometimes dangerous, and a lot of them often dangerous. And many workers were forced to work long hours for pitifully low wages. That's true. Such dramatic changes fueled opposition to industrialization, including the Luddites, or Luddites, known for their violent resistance to changes in Britain's textile industry. So the machines and different mechanized processes allow them to churn out greater and greater amounts. As you get a middle class that has money to buy things, they need to provide them with the things to buy. And this is kind of how our civilization works now. Industrialization, factory work continues to just move around the world now to places where it can be made more and more cheaply. So here, the term Luddite is a person opposed to technological change, and supposedly led by a man named Ned Ludd, although he may have been an invented person. But the Luddites would destroy machinery as a way to oppose industrialization. So, and I can say my grandfather, way back in the early 1930s, was involved in the early unionization of auto workers in Detroit, and I recall him still, telling stories about how they literally had to fight for it. They had to fight the goons sent by Ford Motor Company, trying to stop them from fighting for better wages. You can feel however you want to feel about unions, but it's a response to something. In response to, in the early part of the Industrial Revolution, the mechanization meant less craft. In the Baroque era, Louis XIV created these workshops in Gobelin, Savonnerie, Sèvres, and at the Louvre they had the Louvre was manufacturing of things like furniture, mirrors, other kinds of other kinds of interior furnishings, and that was all handmade, and they recruited the best at these different practices. So you'd have someone who was an eboniste in the Baroque, Rococo era. That's someone who was a specialist at making customized cabinets, like a commode, for example. In the industrialization, they didn't need, it was too slow and too costly to make all these things one at a time. And so you have the growth of piecework, where someone who maybe would have or did make specific individual pieces of furniture might have no choice. The only work would be to make parts of furniture for a factory and then send it to the factory where it would be assembled. So you might make just the same table leg based on a pattern, and you might make hundreds or thousands of them, and you get paid a little bit of money per piece. That's what piecework is. That's very different than making individual pieces of furniture. And from an industrial standpoint, it doesn't make sense to make one piece at a time, like one piece at a time, because they were trying to make it less expensive so that more people could get it. And so there's this tension between quality over quantity. I would, and everybody wants to pay as little as possible for something that's either good or at least decent. But like when you buy a piece of furniture and it falls apart because it's badly made, it's pretty disappointing. And I've had that happen to me. So from here on, from the around the late 18th century, 1800, we will have this back and forth between quality and quantity, between industry and aesthetics. So, okay, good. Now, there are a couple things I want to talk about. One more thing. So, there's this type of loom that was invented in 1803. I want to show this to you here. So, the Jacquard loom it's almost like it's kind of like a precursor to a computerized system. And it's pretty cool. It was invented, making this thing from scratch. A guy named Joseph Jacquard in France, he invented this and it was put into production in the early 19th century. And the mechanization, the sort of partial mechanization of it, allows him to create more complicated patterns quickly. So this is actually something that it was a labor-saving device, and it allowed them to make more complex patterns that would not cost so very much. They would not take so very long to make. So check this out. All right. So normally, plain weave, you just get this sort of alternating warp and weft. And this, for patterns, you get something a little bit more complex. So this guy is basically, he is like the human motor for this loom. So high above, you can tell me at the end of this if this makes sense to you. So where those rods go into the holes, it moves the thread, it lifts it, and so it can lift it in a more complex pattern as that shuttle whips back and forth. You can imagine what a mess you'd have if that stuff got tangled up there. There you go. This is also in the presentation section on the 19th century. Any thoughts on that? Anyone?
So I have a question. I thought jacquard was a type of fabric, and maybe it still is, but is it just the style of, kind of using this technique, or does it also mean, do they usually have that kind of pattern that we saw, like that floral?
Originally jacquard meant something that was made on this type of loom. But I don't know for sure, but I would not be surprised if jacquard has turned into, sort of like morphed into a term for a certain type of design.
Mm-hmm.
Because that really, almost like symmetrical, like mirror image pattern.
Yeah, and it kind of like a heavier tapestry seems to be kind of the term for that type of fabric these days.
Yeah.
So,
but this is the origin. There was a guy, and he invented this loom. But so like when we looked at the tapestry weaving from Gobelin, where they do everything by hand.
Yeah.
And it's not mechanized like this. This loom was like it was an industrial upgrade in terms of speed and efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So
why do you think so much of this like fabric innovation has come out of France specifically? Is there a reason, or is it just that so much of this was focused there? Because even now with like fashion and things coming, out of.
In Europe, the French and then the English kind of led the way in terms of innovation. And, part of it was there was a long competition between the English and the French for dominance of Europe. And I think with like the beginnings, to me, like the beginning with Louis XIV, where he created these workshops in Paris, and those workshops became the standard.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was I think that's the beginning of like France being this like the capital, the European capital of industry and fashion. The English have their own ideas, and so partly, there's this competition that kind of drives both. But I think that this is like because they were Paris was one of the centers of production in Europe for a long time. There was a need to figure out ways to make this more, I guess, just like, come up with innovations that would allow them to do this in either more ways, give them more variety, or efficiency. Because, the growth of the middle, so the growth of the middle class has been, is going on here, and where you have commerce produces, people who have money to spend, but are not members of the of like royalty or nobility. So like the coming out of the Middle Ages, almost anyone who had money was from nobility.
Mm-hmm.
After that, when you get into the early modern era, you get more people like, go back to the Medici. They were, merchants, and they became very wealthy. And this, so in that case, you can almost create your own kind of your own kind of nobility. But more and more, you see the development of professions, and so by the time we get to 18th, 19th century, there are more and more people in professions where they're making money, and then there's a need for more stuff. And so then there is this drive to produce it. And a lot of it is centered in a lot of it is happening in Western Europe. And so I think the English and the French that's where it's happening.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Okay. And this is another, maybe a little clearer, I don't know. It's only a couple minutes long. But this one is at the Henry Ford Museum in Michigan, near Detroit.
This is a mechanical Jacquard loom. This technology was developed in France in 1803 by a weaver named Joseph Marie Jacquard. The key thing about this loom is that it controls every warp thread, the threads that go from the front to the back of the loom, individually. Because it can do that, the loom can create very complex, fancy patterns in the cloth more quickly and with greater accuracy than the technology available before this loom was developed. These cards are what carry the instructions that are read by the apparatus on the second floor that tells the loom what pattern to create. The holes in the cards are read by a series of pins up in the apparatus, and those holes tell the apparatus which threads down here should be raised for each pass of my shuttle across the warp. Some of you might recognize these cards as looking similar to computer punch cards. Back in the early days of computer technology, punch cards carried instructions that told the early computers what kind of calculations to do. So this loom is the great-great-great-grandfather of the computer technology that we all use today. And that technology started with a machine that produces cloth.
There you go. So that is some a little bit of the what some of the industrialization looked like. You notice in this one with these this one here on the Victoria and Albert Museum website, this guy's going a lot faster because he's just demonstrating how they would act, how it looks in action. So all that happens really fast. And that's how they would have so this is what this is what this guy right here, what he's doing, this is your job all day. Your forearms, that forearm especially, is going to get ripped. And one of your legs, actually probably both of your legs, but one of them is going to be in better shape because he's working that pedal that brings the shuttle back and forth across the warp. Or I think it's that the little thing he's holding in his hand is what's moving the shuttle. So you can see how fast it's going, and so that's a lot faster than those weavers were working. Okay, good. Enough about that. I like that. It's fun. Now, I wanted to show you a little bit about these American styles of furniture, partly because, this is like a kind of a simple educational, it's really like a PDF that I've had. So the furniture, like here, like this chest of drawers, which looks very much like a European chest of drawers, like kind of like a English, like Queen Anne style or Chippendale. So Queen Anne and Chippendale were very, very popular in the English colonies and then the United States. After it became the United States, the Queen Anne sort of morphed into what is called federal style. So the Queen Anne style chairs, it's pretty simple, kind of flat, like the splat here is what this is called. You can see has the shape of an urn, similar to some of those chairs we looked at last week from Chippendale, Hepplewhite, and Linnell. Right, so these, as this says here, Queen Anne style was most highly developed in Philadelphia. Also, New England, Mid-Atlantic states, and the South had their own nuances within the style. The shell, well, here we have the splat looks it's a little bit of the shape of an urn, which is which is neoclassical, and the splat is that section there in the middle. Cabriole leg is this leg that bends out, then back, and then here ending in this little pad foot. Oh no, that is a slipper foot. There's like pad foot, slipper foot, ball and claw. So cabriole is a French word meaning to caper, sometimes translated as the leap of a goat. So it's meant to have this kind of like, it's really almost like it's an abstraction of an animal leg. Here, two different ways that the leg ends, pad foot, ball, and claw. And you can see this is really just like the wood without ornament. It is, and partly in the Americas, they didn't have the resources that they did in Europe, but there was also a more of an interest in like understated, more modest. It's kind of hard to tell which came first. Like, were they modest because they didn't have money, or did they not use that? They didn't have as much. They weren't as wealthy as the Europeans. So, was it one or the other? Were they modest because they didn't have as much, or did they just decide that they didn't need as much because they were modest? Okay, so here's this shell motif, and the shell motif goes back to this shares this in common with the French Rococo. And Queen Anne style was sort of ran around the same time in England as the French Rococo, but it is much more restrained. Materials, walnut, which is a more abundant wood in the Americas, in North America. Walnut, cherry, and maple. It says here, furniture makers in New York and Philadelphia imported mahogany. But mahogany was not nearly as common as these domestics, like the local woods. I'm going to come to. I want to get to here, the flat top highboy. So this tall cabinet, also known as a highboy, has some similarities to like a simpler English, almost like Chippendale. Got the cabriole leg, and here the highboy with the this is like a broken pediment. This is like really from the Renaissance. The broken pediment with the urn finial up at the top here. It's kind of exaggerated, but you can see it still has this like that imitation of the classical entablature that goes way back to the Greek temples. This the Americas, like North America, this was called a bonnet top. It's the same thing as a broken pediment from going back to Renaissance, Baroque. Queen Anne is still around today. You'll still see it. You watch movies, like I watched what was it? House of Cards, which is about the Washington and politics and politicians and the presidency. There's like Queen Anne furniture all over that show. Also federal style. So Chippendale was, Chippendale, we talked about this last week, and here's a image of the Gentleman and Cabinet Makers Director. This is for domestic furniture, which, as the guy the guy said in the interview last week, this was the first time you saw like this term domestic furniture, or no, it's household. I'm sorry, it is household furniture. All right, so Chippendale style incorporated Chinese, Gothic, and modern, as they say, or French styles. And the book was reproduced, made its way to the Americas, to like colonial England, or the English colonies here, and it was copied because his book was a style book that told people, here's how you make it. So you can see Chippendale is more ornate. Chippendale started out with the Rococo style in England, and moved into sort of like he did like the neoclassical and Rococo, and then he kind of just like became this. I don't know. He just started collecting styles and putting them into his book. Now here is a good comparison between a Queen Anne and Chippendale. Let's make that, should have made this bigger so you can see this better. Okay. So here there's much more interesting carving. This maybe is not fair. It has these, it has arms that have this interesting curve to them. But no, the Queen Anne is simpler. Chippendale sofa. As it says here, sofas did exist in the 18th century. They were rare and mostly for the upper classes. So the Um, Never mind, I lost the thought. All right, so here, this is like this desk molding is, as they say here, is meant to imitate like a Chinese appearance. It's this term, I've mentioned this before, chinoiserie, where they would create like the Europeans were imitating what they considered to be a like Asian style or Chinese style. Hmm. And here you can see these drawer pulls on the hardware, or this hardware on a drawer pull on the drawer. Chippendale's directory included sketches of escutcheons, the brass plates behind the handle. Escutcheons were both decorative and practical. They served to prevent wear to the wood from frequent use. The user's hand would only touch the escutcheon, a replaceable part of the furniture, rather than tarnish the unprotected wood. You can also varnish the wood. Here, this is this like Chinese fret that kind of like, these like sort of like diagonal so like that's again, so this is like an example of Chippendale's Chinese style. And this, I love this hairy looking, like these like weird hairy legs and this very simple top. But like this really interesting, like that ball and claw foot is like, so like Chippendale was still, he was using elements from that you would also see in Queen Anne, but he just kind of ran with it, put his own, and in some cases made them more elaborate. Chippendale dressing table. So here, this states that the table illustrates what the soon-to-be popular federal style rejected, carved ornamentation. So it's a little odd sometimes where some of these surfaces seem like they have this smooth section and then some very elaborately carved section. In a way, it's, to me, it's always seemed a little bit indecisive, but still looks good. I think it's kind of cool. But this is much more restrained than what you would find in Europe. So here, the Chippendale, especially in the Americas, just became more, I guess more, selectively ornamental. It's a good comparison right there. And block front. So block front were like this whole like section right here. There's one piece of wood that's carved. So it would have been made from a much thicker piece of wood. So that all of this out here is carved away. This is like left as a relief, and then this is carved as a concave section. So you need a really big, thick piece of wood in order to do the block front. Mm. Mm. All right, Chippendale chest of drawers. So this ball and claw was very common for Chippendale in the Americas. Not a whole lot of ornamentation there. You may have heard of Shaker furniture. Have any of you heard of Shaker furniture?
Yes.
And you maybe know that the Shakers were a sort of like a split off group from Christianity. They were I guess they held themselves separate. They originally came from England, and so one of the things about the Shaker philosophy or their practice of religion is that led them to this kind of furniture is modesty and simplicity. And so decorative ornament was considered to be showy, arrogant, prideful, and that's something that they specifically were rejecting. And so they ended up making this extremely beautiful utilitarian furniture with very simple drawer pulls. It's very unique. It's almost like it is, it's almost like it's modernism before there was modernism, and not for the same reasons. But this idea of stripping away the ornament because it was really not necessary. You don't need the ornament for the furniture to function as a chair or a dresser or a table. And here, this simple Shaker bedroom, they did have these like a chair, this what I guess would be a picture, it's a little too low to be a picture rail, but this is like a peg rail where they would hang things. They would hang their clothes when when chairs were not in use. They would hang the chairs up on on pegs up here, so they could be off the floor. And here, this is a more modern, something that is called Shaker, but is made in a more modern manner. And even like this panel, the panel doors, I think that's maybe as much as the Shakers would ever permit themselves. So federal style is related to the beginning of the nation of the United States. And as this says, the Founder Fathers drew inspiration from heroes of the past from the Roman Empire in particular. And so the Roman eagle is replaced by the bald eagle. And you see the eagle a lot in federal style. If you see the eagle in this era, it's federal. Okay, so it has really, so this, as this tells you, building furniture required the work of many artisans, cabinet makers, inlay artisans, carvers, gilders, painters, upholsterers. So some of this is already getting to be, this is the United States was created at the end of the 18th century. So we're already getting into some of the like piece-made factory production. But compared to today's standards, some of this stuff I'm sure would still be quite nice. But like here, this oval drawer pull, I guess that that plate, that's like more like you get away from that more elaborate escutcheon, and you get that more like just simpler oval for the drawer pull. That's nice. It's simple, using different types of wood to create the contrast, and so that's really the different types of wood in this case become ornament. They become ornamental. And here, still using classical influence. Federal style associated with the United States. The United States is associated itself with ancient heroes like Roman and Greek, and they're a federal style break front cabinet with a bookcase, and there's your eagle, there's your urn finial, and this is a sort of pediment, but you don't see carving, except for some minimal carving up here. This like little dental. Okay, and there is such a thing as an American Empire style. Because, people, when Napoleon was successful and people want to emulate success, the pitch of that chair looks mighty uncomfortable, I gotta say. I don't think my back would tolerate it. But you see, this has this decorative Roman element with the tassels on the upholstery pillow. This tapered cylinder, which does kind of look like an old Roman piece of furniture. This kind of looks like it almost comes off of a Roman lectus. Empire style room with this, the window treatments, the chandelier, and this style of Rome, really like the style of Roman chair with this, basically it's two semicircles, or maybe they're connected, but this goes back to that old Sella Carillus, and definitely used in the European Empire style. We will talk about some revival styles. So here in the 19th century, so we'll talk a little bit about the Victorian period, and either this week or next week. Revival styles in the Victorian period. So Victorian period is related to Queen Victoria of England, and she reigned for a very long time, late 1837 to 1901, and you had revival styles of Renaissance revival, Louis XV, Rococo, Gothic. Even throw in some Byzantine and Aztec styles. There was a lot of just it's almost like it was a lot of nostalgia. It's very easy to be nostalgic for the past. I, for example, can be very nostalgic about the 70s because that's when I grew up. Some things about the 80s, but not a lot, because I was, I finished high school and went to college in the 80s, and some of the style is really not that appealing to me. But nostalgia is very easy to get hooked into if you have some connection to it, or if you've got some sense that it's interesting or beautiful. When I was growing up, I remember there were lots of movies and TV shows that were in the 70s that were very nostalgic for the 1950s. And I didn't particularly care about them because that was before I was born. But it was very important to a lot of people that, they could, if you get older, you can remember something from 20, 30 years ago. And it's, I don't know, it's almost like it's an emotional thing. All right. So you will see this where there are different styles that recur in the 19th century. So the 19th century is very eclectic, I think you could say. And here's some of this Victorian furniture that does look a little bit like Biedermeier in some respects. Tends to be kind of like very, some of it, like the upholstered furniture is very cushy, sprung upholstery where you have springs inside the upholstery cushions. That was developed in the early 19th century, and so furniture became more comfortable because it would spring back instead of just getting smashed down when the more people sat on it. And so you see this like really deep, like the button upholstery, and they're really deep. The buttons are set really deep because they're these huge poofy cushions. All right, I'm gonna stop here because we're gonna go on to some others. Oh, well, there's arts and crafts, but I got some other arts and crafts for you. Look at that, super poofy. All right, this I'm gonna stop there with this. This is in the presentations for the 19th century. So if you want to review that, you can. Right now, I'm going to take a break.